The wind carried the smell of dust and old hay when Sheriff Elias Ward pushed open the barn door. It creaked like something half alive. He'd followed a trail of footprints through the dry wash, prints too small for a man, too scattered for a horse thief. Still, he came, because the mayor wanted results, and the town wanted someone to blame. Inside, the light was dim and gold, pouring through cracks in the warped boards. Elias waited for his eyes to adjust. A saddle lay overturned, a few feed sacks ripped open. His hand rested on the grip of his Colt, though part of him already knew whoever he'd find here wasn't going to shoot back. A sound came, barely a whisper. Not the sharp rustle of a thief trying to hide, but a shallow breath. He followed it past the stalls, boots silent in the dust. And there, behind a pile of broken crates, he saw her, a woman. Thin as a shadow, her hair tangled like dried grass, clutching something close to her chest. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes wide and glassy from hunger. When he lifted the lantern higher, he saw the two shapes behind her, a boy and a girl curled against the straw, too still for comfort. "Don't move," Elias said quietly. The words came out rough, more habit than threat. The woman didn't scream. She just stared at him, breathing hard, her body a shield around the children. "Please," she whispered. "They're asleep." Elias lowered the gun. For a moment he couldn't speak. He'd seen hungry faces before, seen them fade to nothing in the winter of '73. His wife's hands had looked just like that, trembling, desperate, trying to keep their own child warm. "You Clara Morrow?" he asked finally. The name had been written on a wanted note tacked to the post office board. Her chin lifted a little. Pride even here. "I took some bread," she said, "from the storehouse. It was moldy." They were starving. The boy stirred then, a faint sound like a kitten crying. Elias's throat tightened. He was supposed to bring her in. That was the job. The mayor would call her a thief, the townsfolk would shout for justice, and that would be that. But the job felt heavier than it used to, like a coat that no longer fit. Elias crouched down, setting the lantern on the ground. Its warm light touched their faces. He could see the truth of it now. The fear, the bone-deep exhaustion, the way her fingers trembled around the little one's shoulder. "Not guilt, survival. You've been hiding out here long?" he asked. "Since the last rain," she said. "We walk at night. The boy can't go far." The sheriff rubbed a hand over his jaw. The barn smelled of hay and cold air, but beneath it something else. Hope, faint as smoke. He looked toward the door, the dying light beyond it, then back to her. "You know they'll hang you for stealing, right?" Her eyes met his. "Then they'll have to hang a mother too," she said softly. Elias let out a breath, long and slow. He could already hear the mayor's voice in his head, barking orders, demanding justice. But the word felt twisted now, small and mean against the sight before him. He holstered his gun. "Get the kids up," he said. She flinched, pulling them closer. "Please, not to arrest you," he said, and his tone changed, low, steady. "You can't stay here. There's food at my place. It ain't much, but it's dry and it's warm." Clara's eyes searched his, uncertain, torn between fear and the faintest flicker of belief. Elias stood, lifting the lantern. Dust swirled in its glow, golden and alive. "Come on," he said quietly. "Before the town gets here." Outside, the wind had shifted. The night smelled like cold rain and second chances. The sheriff's cabin sat on the edge of dry mesa, half swallowed by the land. From a distance, it looked like a part of the hills, wood bleached by sun, roof patched with tin, smoke rising slow from the crooked chimney. Elias had built it years ago with his own hands, back when the sound of a hammer meant hope. Now, as he pushed the door open and stepped aside for Clara and her children, he felt the air shift, like ghosts were moving to make room. "Stay close to the stove," he said. The woman hesitated, one arm still around the little boy, the other clutching a torn shawl to her shoulders. Her eyes darted around the room. Table, single bed, tin coffee pot, and a rifle hung above the door. "Everything plain, worn, but clean. It's warmer than it looks," Elias added. He set the lantern on the table, its light trembling across the walls. The boy coughed, a small dry sound that scraped the silence. Elias poured what was left of the morning stew into a tin bowl and slid it toward them. "Eat slow," he said. "You'll make yourselves sick if you don't." Clara hesitated again, then whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was hoarse, unused to kindness. The girl reached for the spoon first, and Elias looked away. Felt like watching something sacred. He busied himself with the fire, tossing in another log. Sparks rose and clung to the air like memories that refused to die. He told himself he'd let them rest, then take them to the edge of town by dawn. But his hands wouldn't move toward the door. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. Elias nodded, still facing the fire. "Since my wife passed." "Been a long while." He didn't turn around, but he could feel her eyes on him, curious, cautious, grateful, all at once. The sound of the spoon touching the tin was steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. It filled the cabin more than words ever could. Outside, the wind pressed against the shutters. Inside, time slowed to something almost human. When the children finished eating, Clara pulled them close and whispered something Elias couldn't quite hear. It was probably a prayer. He'd stopped saying his own years ago, but somehow, the sound of hers made the room feel warmer. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, one for himself, one he set near her. She stared at it for a long moment before wrapping her hands around the cup. Her fingers were trembling, thin but strong. "You should sleep," he said. "There's a cot in the corner." "I'll stay up. I don't mean to trouble you," she murmured. He gave a quiet half-smile. "Ma'am, if trouble came wearing your face, this world would be a gentler place." She looked up sharply, half ready to protest, half ready to believe him. But instead, she just nodded and led her children toward the cot. Elias sat back in his chair, the old wood creaking beneath him, and watched the fire settle. He told himself it was just one night. But the truth came slower, like a whisper he didn't want to hear. He wasn't protecting her because of duty. He was protecting her because he couldn't stand to see Mercy punished again. Clara's breathing evened out. The children curled against her. Elias leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring into the flame. It had been years since he'd heard anyone else breathe in that cabin. Years since the air smelled of more than wood smoke and regret. He took off his badge and set it on the table beside the lantern. The metal caught the light, a small flash of something that once meant pride. Now it looked heavy, like guilt in solid form. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Elias listened to it hit the roof, slow and steady. He told himself it was just the weather changing. But in truth, it was something deeper, something in him loosening, just enough to let hope slip back in. The mornings in Dry Mesa had a way of creeping in quiet, like they didn't want to disturb whatever sorrow the night left behind. Elias woke before the sun, as he always did. Habit, not rest. The rain had passed, leaving the earth damp and the air heavy with the smell of pine smoke and wet dust. From his chair by the stove, he watched the small shapes still sleeping under the quilt, the woman and her 2 children. Clara's hair had fallen loose across her cheek, catching faint light from the dying fire. One of the children, the boy, had his hand resting on her arm like he feared she might vanish if he let go. For a long moment, Elias didn't move. He'd seen too many mornings start with nothing but emptiness. This one, at least, had the sound of breathing that wasn't just his own. When he finally stood, the floorboards groaned beneath his boots. Clara stirred, opening her eyes halfway. "It's morning already?" she whispered. "Near enough," he said. "Coffee'll be ready soon." She nodded, voice still caught somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. "You always wake this early?" "Don't sleep much," he replied, setting the pot on the stove. The mind's got a way of keeping a man company whether he wants it or not. She gave a faint, tired smile, the kind that seemed borrowed from another life. "I know that feeling." The children woke next, drawn by the smell of coffee and frying corn cakes. Elias had found a small tin of flour and used the last of the milk to make something close to breakfast. The girl, Ruth, she'd told him, watched him in silent wonder as though a man cooking was the strangest thing she'd ever seen. Clara sat at the table, shoulders straighter now, though her hands still trembled slightly. "You don't have to feed us," she said softly. "You've done more than enough." He didn't look up. "If I thought that, I wouldn't have made extra." For a few minutes, the only sounds were forks tapping tin plates and rainwater dripping from the eaves. Outside, the first gold of dawn broke through the clouds, catching the steam rising from their mugs. Elias found himself studying her without meaning to. There was something in the way she moved, cautious but deliberate, like a wild creature testing the air before stepping into the open. Every motion carried both fear and pride, as though she refused to let hunger erase her dignity. "Your husband?" Elias asked quietly. "He died," she said. "A year ago last winter. Fever took him. We buried him by the river." He nodded, eyes on the fire. "I'm sorry," she glanced at him. "Don't be. I stopped counting the sorries people gave me. They never came with bread." The words hit him harder than she meant them to. He thought of the town, of all the men shouting for law and order, and how none of them had lifted a hand to help when the storehouse overflowed with grain. After breakfast, the children played outside with a stick and a tin lid. The laughter was small, but it filled the empty space like a hymn. Elias watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, coffee in hand. "They don't laugh like that often," Clara said, stepping beside him. "They should," he replied. "Kids ought to think the world's big enough to hold joy, even if it's borrowed." She looked at him then. Really looked. And for a heartbeat the air between them felt still, solid. Something wordless passed there. Trust, maybe, or the fragile shape of it forming. Later, as the day stretched thin and pale, Elias took his hat from the peg. "Need to head into town," he said. "Buy feed, maybe a bit of meat." "You'll be safe here," Clara frowned. "And when they ask about us?" He paused at the door. "Let me worry about that." When he rode off, she stood by the window, watching until his figure blurred into the horizon. The boy tugged at her skirt. "Mama, will we have to run again?" She knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his hair. "Not yet," she whispered, and for the first time in months, she dared to believe it. That night, when Elias returned, the lamp still burned low on the table, a small circle of warmth waiting in the dark. The morning Elias rode back into town, the air felt different, sharp, watching, like the land itself was waiting for something ugly to happen. Dust clung to his coat as he tied his horse outside the sheriff's office. From the porch, he could already see Mayor Dorsey standing by the well, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice cutting through the square like a rusty blade. "3 nights gone," the mayor said loudly to whoever would listen, "and the sheriff still hasn't brought in that thief." "We can't let law turn soft, gentlemen." Elias felt the eyes on him as he stepped down. He'd lived with that kind of silence before, the kind that followed a man like a shadow before the storm broke. "Morning, Mayor," he said, brushing the dust off his hat. "Morning." "It's near noon, Ward. You find our bread thief yet?" Elias hesitated. "I found her," he said finally. "Good. Then where is she?" He met Dorsey's stare, unflinching. "She's not the villain you think. Just a mother trying to keep her children alive." That brought laughter, hard, bitter laughter from the men by the storehouse. The kind that made Elias's stomach turn. "Law don't bend for tears, Sheriff," Dorsey said. "You bring her in before folks start thinking your badge is just decoration." Elias turned away without answering. Inside, he poured himself a cup of cold coffee that tasted like regret and rust. The deputy, Harlan Pike, leaned against the doorway watching him. "You really hit her out at your place?" Harlan asked. His tone was lazy, but his eyes were sharp. "Folks been talking." Elias didn't look up. "Then let 'em talk," Harlan smirked. "You think you can outstare a whole town, old man?" "They want blood. And I ain't gonna lose my job covering your conscience." That night, Elias rode back under a bruised sky. The children were asleep when he opened the cabin door. Clara looked up from sewing a torn sleeve by the fire. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed careful. "You told them?" "I told them nothing worth hearing," he said. She studied him. "They won't stop, will they?" He shook his head. "Not till they find someone to hang." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, filling the space where trust used to breathe freely. Clara turned back to her sewing. "You should have let us go." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. "And where would you run, Clara? The desert? The hills? They'd starve you before the week's out." She didn't answer. Her hands trembled slightly over the fabric. The next morning, before dawn, hoofbeats thundered outside. Elias reached for his gun, too late. The door burst open. Deputy Harlan stepped in, 2 men behind him, rifles drawn. "Sheriff," Harlan said coldly, "you've been harboring a fugitive." "Town's orders." "Step aside." Elias stood between them and Clara. "You'll lower those guns," he said quietly. "Now." "Not my call," Harlan said. Mayor wants her in front of the square by sunrise. Clara's breath caught. The children clung to her legs. Please, she whispered. They'll kill me. Elias looked at her, really looked, and in that instant, the weight of every choice he'd made pressed down. He'd promised himself he'd never watch someone die hungry again. Yet here he was, standing still while justice wore a noose for a crown. Harlan, he said finally, voice rough. You ever seen mercy change a town? Harlan's smirk faltered. Ain't my job to fix hearts, Sheriff. Just to keep the law. When they took her, Elias didn't move. Couldn't. The boy's cry echoed down the trail long after the riders disappeared. By the time he saddled his horse, the sun was breaking, red, cruel, and silent. He rode hard toward town, each hoofbeat pounding like judgment in his chest. In the square, a crowd had gathered, faces pale with excitement and fear. Clara stood on the platform, wrists bound, her hair whipping in the wind. Elias pushed through them, breath burning, voice cutting through the noise. Enough. The crowd stilled. Dorsey's mouth opened in protest, but Elias's hand was already on the rope, cutting it free. She stole bread, he said, his voice steady, carrying across the square. Not gold, not lives, bread. No one spoke. The mayor's face turned crimson. Elias took off his badge, holding it up once before letting it drop to the dirt. If mercy's against the law in this town, then I don't aim to serve it anymore. He turned to Clara. Let's go. The crowd parted in silence as they walked away. A mother, her children, and the man who finally chose to be human instead of right. And somewhere in that stunned quiet, a new kind of justice was born. The road out of Dry Mesa stretched wide and quiet, a pale ribbon of dust winding through the hills. The morning light came soft, gold across the sagebrush, touching everything with a kind of grace the town had long forgotten. Elias rode slow beside the wagon, hat pulled low, his jaw set but calm. Clara sat at the reins, the children nestled behind her under a patched quilt. They hadn't spoken much since leaving town. Some silences are too deep for words. Every so often, Ruth would point at the horizon, asking where they were headed. Elias always gave the same answer. Someplace with water. It was the only promise he could make that didn't feel like a lie. They stopped near a shallow stream by noon. The water was clear, cold as truth. Clara knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink. Elias watched her reflection ripple and vanish. He'd thought leaving town would bring relief, but the weight in his chest hadn't lifted. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was something quieter. The need to set things right. Reckon we can stay here a spell, he said. Clara looked around. The open sky, the cottonwoods whispering in the breeze. It's peaceful, she said softly, almost surprised. He nodded. Ain't much, but it's honest. They built a small fire by the water. Elias fixed a pot of beans. Clara mended one of the children's shirts. And the world slowed to the rhythm of survival, work, warmth, and the comfort of not being alone. When the boy, Sammy, wandered too close to the stream, Elias reached out and steadied him by the shoulder. The boy smiled, that gap-toothed grin of someone who hadn't learned yet how to hide joy. Elias smiled back before he could stop himself. For a moment it felt like something holy. Later that evening, as the fire crackled low, Clara spoke without looking up. You didn't have to do what you did back there. Elias stared into the flames. Maybe not. But I couldn't stand one more lie in that town. Not after what I've seen. She turned toward him then, her face caught in the lamplight. All those lines of exhaustion and strength carved deep, the kind only truth can draw. You lost someone, didn't you? She asked quietly. Elias's voice came slow. Wife and son. Fever took 'em same winter the storehouse stayed full. Folks said times were hard, but mercy shouldn't depend on the weather. Clara nodded, her eyes shining though no tears fell. Then maybe you didn't just save us, she said. Maybe you were saving what was left of yourself. He didn't answer, but something in him eased, like an old wound breathing for the first time. The children had fallen asleep by then, their faces peaceful in the firelight. The night air carried the smell of pine and rain, and far off, a coyote called, lonely but alive. Elias looked over at Clara. You and the kids could stay, he said. There's good land not far from here. Grass, water, enough for a start. I ain't much company, but I can work. She tilted her head, studying him the way one studies a new sunrise. Cautious, hopeful. You offering a place? Or a life? He gave a small, rueful smile. Guess I'm offering what's left of both. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached for the coffee pot, poured him a tin cup, and handed it over with steady hands. Then I'll take that, she said, for as long as it's honest. He took the cup, their fingers brushing just once, brief, real. The fire burned down to embers. The stars came out thick and clear, crowding the dark like 1,000 unspoken blessings. When Elias finally spoke, his voice was low, almost to himself. Funny thing about mercy, he said. Once you give it away, it finds its way back to you. Clara looked toward the sleeping children, then to him. Maybe that's how families start, she said. Not by blood, by kindness. He nodded, and for the first time in years, the ache inside him felt like peace. Somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the faint sound of the town bell, not judgment this time, but echo. A life left behind. Elias turned to the horizon. You're home now, he said quietly. And as the first morning light touched the land again, it didn't feel like running anymore. It felt like grace finding its way back through the dust.